Happy February, friends. It's wonderful to be with all of you again. I can't believe spring is actually here for the southern states. We're starting to see some blooms. Northern states, you still got a few months to go, but nationwide, spring is rapidly approaching. So we have a lot to talk about today. If I haven't met you yet, my name's Blake. I'm one of the owners of the Bee Supply, and one of the highlights of my month is getting to spend 30 minutes, 45 minutes with you guys to talk about, hey, on a very practical level, what do you need to be doing with your bees to be successful this month? We always keep it practical. We keep it as simple as possible so that you can watch this video and know, okay, with confidence, here's what I need to do in my bees. So before we jump into the bee yard and watch some videos and talk about practical to-dos. Um, I talked about this in last month's webinar. I am so excited about this. I mean, I wrote a book called The Golden Rules of Beekeeping and partnered with Cayman Reynolds, who has a huge YouTube channel and brilliant beekeeper as well, to write what I think a book that fills a incredible niche and need in the market, which is on a very practical level. Here's what you need to know in your first year or two of beekeeping. So this book has over 250 practical answers to questions that you're going to have in beekeeping. So it's you use it as a reference book as you're working your bees, going through your bees. When you have a question, the answer is probably in here. And Caitlin and I kept these answers really simple, clean, and clear. We started out every answer with like one sentence, a one sentence answer. That is, hey, if you don't have time to read a page about how to fix this problem, there's a one sentence quick answer at the very beginning that just answers it with no frills. And then if you want to know more, you can keep reading further down and get a very practical, no nonsense answer to basically any question in bees, beekeeping, woodenware, honey harvest, extracting, queen rearing, anything to do with practical beekeeping. The question and the answer is probably in this book. So we started doing pre-sales, a month and a half or so ago. We had the first shipment of books. We brought them to the NABI, the North American Honeybee Expo, in early January. We had kind of a limited number of books, and we brought them all to the Bee Expo. That was kind of the first books available. And it was so much fun. We sold out. I mean, we had hundreds of books, sold every single one of them. And then Cayman and I did a signing event where we said, hey, bring us your book and we'll autograph it for you. And I think we autographed hundreds of books. I mean, the line was, you can see the line in the background. It was wrapped around the room with folks that wanted their book signed. So it was incredibly humbling, incredibly exciting to see so many people so excited, especially, after taking, years to write this book, to see it actually turn into a book, launched, and then to see beekeepers so excited about it and so appreciative of the content has really just been so humbling. And I appreciate you guys so much. Now, if you weren't at the NABI event, the good news is they are available now. So we actually just got another big shipment in. I think it came in the day before yesterday. So those are getting loaded into our system. If you pre-ordered, those shipments will go out this week. If you haven't ordered, you can follow that QR code or just go to thebeesupply.com and you can now order this book and it'll ship directly to you within a couple of days. So super excited. Appreciate your orders so far, and hopefully you find it helpful. Okay, so if you haven't ordered your bees yet for 2026, you can order them now. We have our famous 30-day guarantee. If you have any issues with your bees within 30 days, bring them back and we'll happily replace them for you. We've got nooks, we've got single story hives, we've got packages, we've got queens. I mentioned it last month, but with our package bees, we've got different flavors, different varieties. We have Italian, we have the Golden West, the Randy Oliver package bees, the Saskatraz, lots of different queen and package options. So I can't believe it, but I mean, we're only a couple months away from starting to do bee deliveries. So if you haven't ordered your bees yet, highly recommend you get that done. The last product I want to feature, of course, are Stan Soft Sugar Bricks. These are great for bees as we go into the roller coaster of weather that is the next few months coming into spring, where you have these really hot days, then these cold days, you have a cold week and then a warm week. Um, when it gets really cold, the bees won't always drink a liquid syrup. So throwing a couple of Stan Soft Sugar Bricks on a hive is super helpful as we go through February. And we'll talk more about that later. But follow that QR code and check out our famous bricks. Sherry, what do we have going on with topics this month?
How's it going?
Good to see you.
You as well. And boy, spring is trying to pop. I'm in Southeast Texas, and y'all, I've got a tree, big tree, right out my window here, and it literally has some buds on it. I don't know why. It's still cold out there, but we had warm weather, and then we had like it's back and forth, just like Blake said, back and forth. But spring is coming. It's coming. All right, our February topics, because we are winding up for it, right? Week one, if you're signed up for the email, you're going to get this in your email. All of these are already on the website, though, okay? And I've got it circled where you can find them. Varroa mites in early spring. Now, I wrote this just for this time of year. You really and truly have to start thinking about what we're about to do, and I think you're going to really like it, okay? I did after I was done with it. So go in and read it. I think you'll really find it interesting and learn a lot. Week two, learning to look beyond the obvious. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that and explain it here in a minute. Week three, why feed pollen subs? And there's actually, well, it tells you why feed pollen subs, but then there's going to be links to other how to feed the pollen subs, when, where, how you do anything related to pollen subs is going to be in that article. Week four, monitoring space in honey stores. And folks, by the end of February, we're really going to need to be paying close attention to that because the bees inside, they're growing. As soon as we hit that, December 21st or 22nd, the winter solstice, we know that's when things start happening. It has been happening in there, whether it's been warm or cold outside. So we got to be ready for it. All right, Blake, swipe that slide. All right, now learning to look beyond the obvious. This sounds a little vague, right? But it's truly not. I wrote this article about a year ago and I keep improving it and keep improving it. And it's actually one that I've traveled with and spoken in clubs and conferences because it's super popular. And the reason is that when we start beekeeping, we're told what's the obvious? So what's the obvious? Population, right? Eggs and larvae, I got to be looking for that. Frames of honey in stores, pollen in the hive. Is their brood in there? What's it look like? The space, disease as evidence of varroa mites and such. Well, that's obvious. We probably that's beekeeping 101 and our mentor, your clubs, or wherever you're learning it, internet, we keep that top of the list, but it's what is below the obvious that what we don't get until usually 2 or 3, 4, 5 years into our journey. It took us several years before we realized that we weren't looking beyond the obvious and our bees were paying the price for it. And on number two, I put this in there. I don't know what happened. I was just in the hive a week ago and everything was fine. If I had a dime for every time I heard that, y'all, I would be rich. And I've been guilty of it. In the beginning, we were like, wait, we were just in there. Everything looked fine. But then we go back and it's not. Either we've got a hive that's completely overrun with a disease or a little pest, whether that be small hive beetles or wax moths or what, but there was something that we missed. We have to train our eyes and train ourselves when we're beekeeping to look beyond that obvious. I put a picture here that to me is a great example. I don't want to do a spoiler alert for the article because I want you to read it. But in that picture, what's the obvious? Bees. There's tons of bees. Well, what I need to do though is think a little beyond of what I'm just seeing. If I pull up a frame and I see it completely capped brood in on say 2 or 3 of those frames in there, I've got a population explosion about to happen. And if I don't do something quickly, I'm going to have a swarm and lose half that colony when spring first starts, which is going to negate everything that I prepped for. I want that to be a good hive that I can come in spring and make splits out of and grow my yard and produce honey and do all these things. But if I'm not paying attention to my brood production, what's on that frame? What is on that frame? I'm seeing that brood is going to eventually emerge, and you're going to end up with 3 times the population in there before you can blink an eye. And then you'll go, wait a minute, look fine. I had lots of bees in there. But did you look beyond the obvious? So that's a good example. And I go into good detail with that in the article of different little scenarios like that of what you need to be looking for. And one point that I cannot stress enough is that every inspection is 3 inspections. The one you did the last time, the one you're doing now, and the one you're going to do next time, because you want to use what you saw last time leading into what you're looking at now. I saw this. Is it progressing properly? And then what you're doing now and seeing now, it's going to feed the information for that future inspection. So past, present, and future, every single one you do is 3 inspections. Keep that in mind. The takeaway from that, think proactively. What you're seeing is going to need some kind of interaction from you in the future, either today or in the future. So be proactive on things that you see. If you see something wrong, identify it, second bullet point, and resolve it. Because if you do not, the bees will, and that could mean they book it and you don't have any bees left to mess with. So that's not what we want. Anyway, enjoy the article. It's on the website now. That's it. Thanks, Blake.
Awesome. Thank you, Sherry, as always. Wonderful information. One quick thing I want to circle back to from this is from 2025. So this was a slide that I put up last year where we I was talking about this was the first time I really started talking about it was in early February, late January, early February of 2025 when we had these huge hive losses nationwide. You know, these were all dead beehives. And the story kind of broke this time last year. It got national media attention all over it, where, you know, we just had these colossal industry-wide losses. And it's really, beekeepers have been working incredibly hard all year trying to recover from those kind of unprecedented loss rates. And I want to give you a quick update because here we are a year later. A lot of folks have said, well, what's happening this year? Are the same losses happening again? And we don't really know until all the commercially managed hives arrive in California for the first pollination event of the year, which is California almond pollination. And so that's happening right now. All the bees are showing up in California. We're getting a good look at everything. And I'm relieved to report that we are not seeing losses like we saw in 2025. My own operation, our losses are very normal, very manageable. And most other beekeepers I'm talking to are reporting the same. There are certainly some horror stories. A few beekeepers have lost entire operations, but industry wide as a whole, and I don't want to jump the gun too much and say, oh, you know, everything's fine, but I'm not hearing and seeing the same losses that I saw and heard of last year. So don't want to say everything's perfectly fine, because again, it's still a little early, but we were certainly seeing unprecedented issues at this time last year that we're not seeing this year, which is fantastic news. That being said, um, the numbers aren't in yet. So, you know, hopefully everything is still okay a month from now. And then it's still unknown why exactly all those losses happened last year. So, anyway, wanted to give you guys a quick update on that as we head into the new year. So, in our March monthly buzz, I will certainly update you guys and let you know if anything changes. But right now, it's largely good news out of California, which is, again, a huge relief compared to last year. So, with that, let's jump out into the bee yard. Let's see what's going on in the bees in February, and then we'll come back in for some Q&A and some classroom time.
I'm going to talk for a minute about reversing boxes. It's a common question when you read beekeeping books or read social media. You might hear people talk about in late winter reversing boxes. And should you do it? Do you have to do it? Why do it? I don't have a great hive in this yard to illustrate the conditions in which you would reverse a box, but I'm going to pretend on this poor hive here. Um, Here's the concept. So reversing boxes occurs when it's helpful when over the course of the winter, all the bees have moved up into the top box. Usually there's more honey stored in the upper boxes in a beehive. And so over the course of the winter, that cluster can tend to move upwards. And sometimes in some situations, you'll get to late winter and all the bees are in the top box and no bees are in the bottom box. As a general rule of thumb, bees prefer to move up rather than down. And so if all the bees are in the upper box, what we can do is take the top box, reverse it with the bottom box, and then let it sit. And then over the course of the spring, the bees are going to move back up into the upper box. Now, do you have to do this? Absolutely not. It's a little bit helpful to the bees because, again, their nature is they'd rather move up than move down into the empty space. But if you don't reverse it, the bees will move down just a little more slowly. So to illustrate though, let's open up this hive. It does have a fair amount of bees in the top box, but let's pretend that this top box is completely full. I open it up and there's virtually no bees in the bottom box. It's really simple. All I'm going to do is break that propolis seal between the two boxes. I'm going to lift off the top box. I'm going to lift off the bottom box. And I'm going to reverse them. Just like that. And now the empty box goes on top. The full box is on the bottom. And I'm done. And now over the next month, as the queen begins to lay, the population grows, the bees are all going to move up into that now top box, which is empty, and start to fill both boxes a little faster than if they would if they had to move downward. So pretty simple, not critical. If you're thinking, oh, I don't want to go lift those heavy boxes, don't worry about it. The bees will move down, but you'll speed them up by a few weeks if you do go ahead and reverse those boxes. I want to talk for a moment about when you can look at your bees. What are the weather conditions, and then what kind of inspection should you do based on the weather conditions? So today's a beautiful day, 65 degrees, sunny, a gentle wind. Obviously today you could go through this hive, pull out frames, look for a queen, check food stores, leave them open for as long as you need to do the inspection. But we all know that on a beautiful day, you can look at bees anytime. What conditions should you not look at bees, or what type of inspection should you do when the conditions are poor? So I'm going to walk you through what that looks like. Keep in mind, it's more important that your bees are cared for and that they have the food they need than you avoid opening them. I've worked bees in the snow before. As long as you're fast, you can you can look at bees in the snow. So here's the inspection I do. If it's cloudy, cold, drizzly, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, but I'm concerned, here's what I do. I don't bother using a smoker, by the way. That's pretty much pointless when the bees are clustering. I quickly look under the lid, break the box apart. I'm looking at the population, at the cluster between the boxes, lift up the next boxes, get an idea for the population size. I'm going to lift up to see how much these boxes weigh, and I'm done. That's it. So 30 seconds, quick look. I've been able to see how many bees there are between the boxes, and I've got a feel for how much food they have. If the boxes are crazy light, I'm going to want to stand sugar bricks on them. I might throw, I might even give them some liquid syrup too to make sure they've got the food they need, and I'm done. So very, very fast. I try to do that a couple hours before it gets dark so the bees have plenty of time to reform their cluster. That's it. If it's, 40 to 50 degrees and sunny, then, I have no problem taking the lid all the way off, pulling some frames out, not much going on here, but there's some honey, um, you know, looking at a frame, getting the lid back on, pulling the second box off, pulling up a frame, looking at it quickly, I'm probably just going to pull up one frame, put everything back together, and I'm done. So maybe a minute, if it's, cloudy, cold, 40 to 50 degrees, I can pull a frame out under a minute. I'm done. If it's above those temperatures, I take all the time I need. Bees do pretty well in the cold. They can reform the cluster. You just don't want to do that more extensive inspection, 30 minutes before it gets dark. You want to give any bees that fall out of the hive time to work their way back in. But in general, it's important that you check them for food stores, you check for population, even if the conditions aren't perfect, to make sure that they have the food they need. Because starvation will kill the bees long before cold does. So if you're new to beekeeping, or maybe you've been keeping bees for a long time, a common question is, how close together can I put my bees? And the bees get confused when they're trying to find their home. Normally I would do a video like this in our teaching bee yard with 4 or 5 hives in it, and kind of show you how to arrange things. But I want to take a second while I'm out here in our commercial holding yard in California, and the 1st of February, and show you what bees are capable of and how well they can do in all sorts of conditions. So I've got a few thousand beehives behind me right now, and these have been unloaded in the last couple of nights, and they're only going to spend a couple of days here, and then they're going to go into the almond orchards to pollinate almonds. But you can see we've got each pallet of bees. There's 4 beehives on a pallet, and each hive is a couple inches apart on this pallet. And then you've got these rows of hundreds of hives, and each pallet is only 4, 5, 6 feet apart. And there is no drifting at all in this yard. I mean, what drifting is when the bees get confused about where they belong, and a bunch of the bees will kind of form a mass, drift on the hive, and you see this hive completely covered in bees. And that's when I go, uh-oh, we've got a problem. These bees are drifting. But that's a primary objective that we're trying to avoid when you arrange a bee yard. We don't want the bees to get confused. But even in this scenario where we have hundreds of hives in perfect lines, they are still doing a fantastic job at finding out which home is theirs and which hive is theirs. You notice a lot of these hives are different colors. So you might have a gray box and a white box, a mix of different colors. That does really help bees. In our operation, we try to have a mix of colors. Now, it doesn't have to be red and blue and green and orange and yellow, but like we have a lot of gray boxes, and then a lot of boxes, and then a lot of tan boxes, and we mix all those together, and that can help in these situations, help the bees find their way home. But even without that, the bees often do a really good job. So if you're trying to decide how to lay out your bee yard, what hive goes where, what I always tell beekeepers is do what's comfortable for you. So create enough space so that you can get all the way around each hive and work it properly. Put it at a height that's comfortable for you. Arrange it in a way that you like and is aesthetically pleasing for your backyard or your bee yard. And don't worry too much about the bees. If you've got 4 or 5 or 6 hives, they're going to do just a fine job finding their way home. You can sit on the front of the hive, and that helps, or you can put them along a tree row, and that helps. But if you have a few hives, you can put them in pretty much any configuration you want at any spacing that you want, and they'll be just fine. Now, one thing I would note, I would not leave these bees here, for weeks on end throughout the spring or the summer this close together. We would space them out along a tree row, etc. But for a few days, they do just fine, and they orient just fine, even in mass quantities.
Well, welcome back. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Let's do some Q&A. Sherry always manages this for us. We have a lot of you guys that send in amazing questions, and it's a lot of fun to read them and to answer them. And Sherry, what do we have this month?
Okay, are you ready? We've
I'm
got
ready.
people coming out. They're coming out of the woodworks going, okay, my bees are alive. What do I do? I love this first one because I've seen this question a time or two, and I've had this question a time or two. I have several supers full of honey from dead out sitting in my garage. Should I put them on my splits this spring or feed them collectively to the bee yard? In other words, putting them out and let my bees feed off of them.
Yeah, such a good question. And my answer would be yes. It's up to you. Either works. You know, if the bees in your bee yard need food, you know, putting those 50, 60 feet away from your bee yard and letting the bees rob out that honey and eat it is a great option. If your bees don't really need feed, I would just save it and use it for your splits. It'll give your splits kind of a running start. You can put a
Mhm.
few frames of honey in each split, and it's a great way to get those splits up and running. So either works based on what your bees need.
Yeah, agreed. Completely. I can't add anything to that. That's exactly right. Both are right. Number two, last week I noticed a lot of ants around my hive. I pulled the bottom board out and there were a lot of ants on it. Should I do anything? And if so, what?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, it depends a little bit on, you know, what kind of ants. Were they fire ants? Were they sugar ants? Some other kind of ants. Sometimes when it's wet or cold, ants can kind of move on to the bottom board, or sometimes I see them under the inner cover, or between the inner cover and the outer cover, with eggs even, you know, trying to kind of live there. You know, I usually just dump them out. You know, I knock them out, dump them out. Usually, ants don't bother beehives. I mean, in most cases, ants aren't going to take over a beehive. They're not going to make it into the brood nest unless a hive is really very, very weak and almost dead anyway.
Mhm.
So in most cases, I would, you know, sometimes they're all over the bottom board because debris is falling out of the hive onto the bottom board, and the ants are eating that debris.
Mhm.
And so I would just say, you know, dumping the ants and the debris, cleaning off that bottom board is usually sufficient. And I wouldn't do much else. You know, I don't like putting poison around the hives. So, you know, in most cases, just keeping that bottom clean is all I would do.
I agree. I will never forget seeing a Randy Oliver graphic years ago where he put like coffee cans or tin cans on the bottom of the legs of, it was probably just an illustration. I don't picture him having legs on his hives, but it just stops. It gives a moat in between the ants and your actual structure. If you've got legs for a framework under your hives, you can put some sort of a stopgap. And we have a little product called Ant Cant that you can spray
Yeah.
on the hive stands if you just continue to have problems. But odds are you won't continue. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. Very true.
Number three, it looks like I have a hive that's not going to make it. We've heard this a time or two over the last week or so. I tested and treated throughout the fall and everything looked good. I just tested again and the mite count was through the roof. What should I do or could I do differently? Sad.
That's an interesting one, and I'm sorry to hear that. I'm a little stumped on that one. Usually, you know, mite levels are not going to increase after the fall. You know, because Varroa mites only reproduce in brood. And usually you don't have much brood, you know, throughout the winter. And so it's very rare to see mite counts increase
Mhm.
during between the fall and the spring. So a couple questions I would have if we were chatting would be, well, when did you do your last test? You know, there's a, you know, and where do you live? You know, if you're in southern Florida, well, yeah, you can absolutely have brood year round and you can continue to have those mites continue to reproduce. It was very warm throughout the South for most of the fall, and even early winter was very warm.
Mhm.
So, you know, if you did your last test in mid-September, you know, and you're in a warm region and the bees kept rearing brood through November, yeah, you could have had varroa mites rise up, rates increase during those you know weeks of that warm fall and winter. So um, what I suggest you do differently is, you know, I would do another test later in the year. So I usually recommend treating for varroa mites once you harvest honey, you know, so like August time frame, you know, well, when you harvest honey, you know, if you
Yeah,
harvest honey the 4th of July, do your mite treatment. You know, the sooner the better.
right.
But then, you know, do another test, you know, as long as you have brood, you know, so if you've still got 2 or 3 or 4 frames of brood, you know, test every 6 weeks or so until the brood is gone. So you might should have done a treatment later in the year or a test and a treatment later in the year. The only other thing I can think of would be, if for some reason your hive dwindled down to being a very small hive and kind of all the varroa mites collectively consolidated down to a very small number of bees that are left.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, that's possible, but I would generally blame it on maybe not testing and treating late enough in the year.
I agree. Yeah, and I wondered too on that if depending, like you said, the weather, we've had drifting. We had a ton of drifting at one point, and I know that can make a big difference. And if you got one, if you didn't test every hive
Yeah,
and you had one that was totally loaded down and they migrated over, it could be, or what were you testing with? Did you get an accurate test? And did you do a follow-up test after you treated? Did you do a follow-up and verify that it worked? Because that's the key is
yeah,
test, treat, and test again and make sure that it really worked. That's what I would do differently is just to make sure you're following up, to make sure you are going into winter with that really, truly low mite count, that it wasn't, tricking
yeah.
you.
Right, absolutely. Yeah,
All right, next one. If you have a weaker hive, and I love this one because they were very specific. If you have a weaker hive, 2 to 4 frames, do you suggest giving them 1 to 2 frames of brood from a stronger hive to tide them over until March? I'm feeding stand sugar bricks, so food isn't an issue, but they continue to shrink, and I'm not sure some will have good populations the next time it freezes. Probably they're meaning, we're going to have another freeze or two. I mean, we had one
yeah,
yesterday, so
yeah.
good. It's a good
Yeah,
question.
it is a good question, and it's a bit of a balancing act on is a weak hive worth potentially wasting resources on,
Yeah.
versus just calling it quits on those hives. I mean, I think it depends on how much extra brood you have. If you've got really some really strong hives with 6, 7 frames of brood, at this point, giving a hive with just 2 frames of bees, that's a hard sell. I mean, it's probably just not going to make it. But this time of year, if you've got a hive with 3 or 4 good frames of bees, um, then I would give them 1 frame of capped brood from a strong hive. I would not risk my strong hives. So if you've got hives with just 2 or 3 frames of brood, I'm not going to take a whole frame of brood from them and give it to a weak hive. But if you've got a good strong hive with, 4, 5, 6 frames of brood, couple boxes full of bees, they can spare it. I would only give them capped brood, but I would give
Mm,
them a 1 frame at a time, a fully capped brood to a hive with 3 or 4 good frames of bees, and
mm,
they'll probably pull through. Um, but again, a hive with just 2 frames of bees probably isn't going to be able to keep that brood warm and take care of it anyway. So
mm.
2 frames is probably a lost cause.
Right. We've had that happen before. I mean, the odds are that you're going to have that happen at some point. And we made sure we reduced it down. We actually even put them in nuke boxes and then sandwiched them in between other full-size hives to keep it warm, to kind of just take advantage of those other
Yeah,
hives for the
yeah,
warmth. But making sure there's not too much room in there. But I mean, there's a shot. At least it gives them a shot at staying warm enough till population starts to grow and take advantage of what you just said of putting some brood in there. But anyway, there's not, you're right. It's pretty weak hive.
yeah,
Pretty weak
yeah.
hive. All right, last one. I have a nuke ordered to pick up in April. Yay. What are your recommendations for getting it to produce honey in its first year?
Yeah, well, thank you for
Yeah.
ordering a nuke. It's tough. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, it is tough to get a nook to produce honey in its first year. I mean, I would say
Mhm.
it's a small percentage that can pull it off. And it's just because you're getting a Nook with five, it's got 5 frames in it. They have to draw out, you're going to transfer that Nook into a deep box. They've got to draw out all the other frames in that deep box. Typically you're going to add a second brood box. They've got to draw all those frames out. It's a lot of work for a hive to draw and fill their brood boxes and make a honey crop, which is why we always say, even if you lose your bees your first year, take care of that comb
Yeah.
because if you've got comb, you might be able to go from a nook to a honey crop in one year if you're lucky and all the conditions are right, because they don't have to draw out all that comb. Now, if you really, really, really want to produce honey in your first year, here's a couple suggestions. Um, if that was just super important to me, here's what I would do. I would get the nuke, put them in your brood box. Obviously, follow all our recommendations on feeding. So you want to feed, but not overfeed. But give them enough food to draw all the comb in that bottom box. Once that bottom box is about 80 to 90% drawn out, I would, uh, if you can buy a pre-drawn out box of comb from someone else, beekeepers quit beekeeping all the time. So if you can find a box of comb that's already drawn out, then what I would do is I would put a queen excluder over that box, that single story box. I would put my comb up on top and let my bees fill that box of comb with honey. I would harvest the honey in June or July, and then I would remove the queen excluder and I would put that now empty box of comb back up on top, feed them over the summer, let them fill up that second box now as their second brood box. So that was a lot of information. But the alternative would be, you could just, put a second box of foundation, a brand new box of not drawn out with comb directly on top of your first box. Let them get started drawing it out, get a fist-sized piece of comb on a couple of those frames drawn out, then shake all the bees out so you make sure the queen isn't in that second box, add a queen excluder, and let them continue drawing out that second box and fill it with honey. So you're running a hive as a single story brood box instead of two brood boxes. Your first box is where the brood's being reared. Your second box is where the honey is going. That
Mhm.
gives you the best chance of making honey crop in your first year. And then again, once you harvest that honey, you can add that box without the queen excluder back onto the hive, feed them over the summer, and now you've got your two brood boxes.
That's perfect. That's great advice. If y'all really got every detail of that, it can totally happen. I love that.
Yeah,
Excellent.
perfect. Thanks
All
for the
right.
question, Sherry. Those are good
Okay.
ones. Thank
All
you.
righty.
All right,
Thanks,
see you next
y'all.
time. All right, folks. So let the roller coaster begin. I mean, Sherry and I have already alluded to this and talked about this a bit, but I mean, this is a picture of an elm tree here in North Texas that's blooming. And we see a lot of this. We see the mustard starting to bloom, the henbit, the dandelion, the willow. There's a lot of plants in the South that are starting to bloom, and then you kind of get these weeks where it's warm. Yeah, I'm going to have an 80-degree day where I live tomorrow. And so you kind of get these warm spurts and then these really cold weeks, and that's normal. And so what I'm seeing is brood rearing is ramping up. Some areas are getting heavy pollen flows, some aren't getting anything, temperatures up and down. And so, some days you'll see the bees flying like crazy, and other days not at all. And this all has feed implications that we'll talk about in just a minute. But um, we are seeing significant. This is a map that I created a few years ago that kind of shows, on average, when a significant pollen flow starts in each region. Now, this isn't perfect. Every year is a little different. That's why there's a 2-week range in there. Um, and it can vary a bit. Um, and this is not just when a bee brings in pollen. This is when kind of your major pollen flow starts. Now, this isn't your honey flow or a nectar flow. This is just pollen. So this map, again, it's not absolutely perfect, but it's generally accurate to most years of when you should expect to see a significant pollen flow begin. Another resource you can use, this is the Leaf Index. You can just Google it. It's a National Phenology Network, Leaf Index. And this shows you if spring is ahead of schedule or behind schedule. It updates every day. And this is just showing kind of in real time plants that are leafing out and if they're doing it early or late. The more red the image, the earlier it is. You can kind of see the graph on the bottom there. The more blue, the later it is. So you can see, again, we're just getting started here, but certainly in California, southern states, so far, we're looking at a very early spring as far as the leaf index goes. So again, this is just a hint. Weather can change, but I know, so far we're looking at, despite the cold snaps we've had, a pretty early spring so far. Inside February hive. So as I look at bees, I mean, it ranges from no brood to a couple frames of brood, but you're going to start seeing increased brood rearing. I'm also seeing a lot of this. It's sad, but it's common, where after these intense cold Arctic blasts that we've had the last few weeks, you're probably going to go into some hives and they're dead. And this is often what we see, just kind of a little cluster of bees that were remaining, and they either ran out of food or just couldn't keep the hive warm enough. And it's awful to see, but it's also incredibly common. And so, I just brushed those dead bees off, and now this is that super valuable comb that you can use to install a nook or a package into, and your next hive will grow so much faster once you have that comb in place. You're going to see a lot of cleansing and orientation flights. Even if you're further north, when you get a warm day, you're going to see bees coming out, taking a break, stretching their legs, going to the bathroom. And then you're also going to see orientation flights occur. So as new brood is being reared and is hatching, those new baby bees go on orientation flights. So you're going to kind of see these bursts of flight as the bees go out when it gets warm, and then they'll all come back home after their orientation or their cleansing flight. Feeding's a big deal this time of year. My recommendation is every hive needs to maintain at least 20 pounds of stores through the month of February. You can, it- if you're getting days that are in the 70s and 80s, you can switch to one-to-one syrup feeding. If you're still, below that temperature, then something like Stan's soft sugar brick is still a great resource. I'm using division board feeders or top feeders rather than entrance feeders. And I'm checking hives 2 or 3 times in February to make sure they have enough food. But what's really important is February, March, April, many states you're seeing brood rearing ramping up. You're seeing very little nectar producing flowers blooming. And so the bees need a lot of food, but there isn't a lot of natural food coming in. And so we often have to step in and do some feeding. Pollen patties, I'm not feeding many pollen patties unless, unless my hive has brood and I see that we have a really cold week. When you have 3 or 4 or 5 days below freezing, it can kind of kill off all the pollen producing flowers. And so after you have a really cold week, putting a pollen patty on is helpful. Or if I see a really cold week is coming up and the bees aren't going to be able to fly much, I'll often give them a pollen patty so that they can continue taking care of the brood that they've started rearing. I do recommend if you're in the southern half of the United States to test hives to make sure that you don't have a varroa mite problem. If mites are over 2 per 100 bees, February and March, even early April are really good times to treat for varroa mites. If there's 2 or 3 frames of brood or less, you can try hot guard, oxalic acid, or formic acid. If you have multiple frames of brood, I would use Apivar or Apigard. But once you get a warm couple of days, if you've got developing brood in your hive, you're going to want to do a varroa mite test just to make sure everything's good. I would say about 50% of hives usually are pretty good this time of year and don't need any treatment, and about 50% will need a treatment. Usually in the month of March is when most beekeepers treat, and it's warm enough to actually treat. As a reminder, here's a chart of when the varroa mite threat increases. You can see that as brood rearing begins in February and March, that trend, that threat level just increases and kind of peaks out mid to late summer, and then starts falling off as brood levels fall off as well. I'm not going to read everything on this slide. We have got several videos. If you just search our YouTube channel for sticky boards, we've got lots of videos explaining exactly how to use sticky boards. But they're a great way to test for varroa mites. The most accurate test is the alcohol wash. Again, there's videos on our YouTube channel about how to do the alcohol wash, but a lot of beekeepers just don't do alcohol washes. And so a sticky board isn't as accurate, but it is a good option. It's quick, easy, and you don't hurt any bees doing it. to test for Varroa mites. Something I get every year, a lot of people ask about, which is a great problem, is, hey, it's February and my hive is really crowded. What do I do? I don't want them to swarm in March. I can't get queens to make a split until April. What do I do to make sure my hives don't swarm before I'm able to get queens and do splits? So there's three options. One is make a split, add boxes, or equalize. I don't recommend making splits because it's hard to get queens, if not impossible. Allowing bees to raise their own queen is slow and very risky because you typically don't have the proper drone population to mate with that queen in February. Um, Inclement weather is frequent in February, which makes queen mating difficult. The exception would be if you're in South Texas or South Florida, far south, maybe Louisiana, Mississippi, where it's been warm for a while and your hive already has swarm cells, then you can make a split and make sure that split has some of those swarm cells in it. But generally don't recommend doing splits. What I do recommend is adding boxes. When your top brood box or super is 80% full, it's time to add another box. So you can have three deep boxes on a hive if you want. You can add a box of foundation and lightly feed the hive and get them to start drawing out foundation. And then plan to split once queens become available in April. So this is my favorite method is just add boxes. Another good option is equalizing, which is you can share brood bees and honey between hives. So if you have here's some prerequisites that are important. If you have low mite counts, no brood disease, the original donor hive has at least one box full of bees, and you gauge that strength on a warm day, then you can take resources and share them with weaker hives. And that reduces the strength of the hive that's getting too crowded and boosts the strength of weaker hives. So equalizing brood, again, there's some videos on our YouTube channel if you want to watch a whole video about how to equalize brood. But in essence, what you're doing is you're selecting a frame of mostly capped brood, shake the bees off, add that frame of brood to the very center of the brood nest between other frames of brood and bees in your weaker hive. Make sure the hive has enough bees to fully cover that new frame of brood. And I don't ever add more than one frame of brood at a time. Because if you add two or three frames of brood, then it's going to be more than that hive can take care of. And then you can replace, the hive that you took the brood from, you can just put an empty frame back in that hive for the bees to refill. You can do the same thing with honey. You can equalize honey. You can select a frame of honey from a hive that has too much, shake the bees off, add it to the outside edge of the cluster in a weaker hive. You don't want to separate the cluster or separate brood with a frame of honey. So the honey goes kind of on the outside edge. But it's a great way to move honey around. And you can even equalize bees. It's not as common, but you can select a frame from your really strong hive that's full of larvae, which means that frame is going to be covered with nurse bees taking care of that larva. Make sure the queen isn't on that frame. Smoke the entrance of your weak hive, and then shake the bees off the frame into the entrance of that weak hive. And then those nurse bees are going to just crawl right in. And typically, nurse bees are very readily accepted into a weaker hive. You can repeat that with up to three frames of bees, but just make sure you don't take too many bees from your strong hive. Make sure you leave at least one deep box full of bees for your strong hive. Um, Last comment I want to make is what to expect to see in your hives in February. You're going to see 2 to 8 frames of brood, depending on the hive population and your region. You should start to see abundant and growing pollen stores in the south, a little early for the north. You want to have at least 20 pounds of stored honey in your second box and an actively laying queen. In the southern states, once we get into like mid to late February, especially if you have no eggs or larvae, you don't have a queen. Right now, if you don't see eggs and larvae and all your other hives do have eggs and larvae, that hive's probably queenless. But if you're not seeing eggs and larvae in half your hives, then it's probably just a little bit too early yet. So with that, guys, hopefully that was helpful. I can't wait to see you in March. March and April March, April, May are some of our biggest monthly buzz webinars. There's the most to educate you guys on, to talk about, to communicate, because there is just so much information to cover when we hit the busiest of bee seasons. So be sure to come back to our YouTube channel to watch March, and I cannot wait to see you there. Have a great spring, everybody.